Welcome to the Tim Castle Show, where I sit down with courageous individuals doing inspirational things around the world. Come with me on this journey, meet the people, I pull back the curtain, I find out who they really are. I started off building this podcast for my sons as something they could look back on later in life and see the conversations that their dad had with people that he respected and admired, but most of all, get the lessons. And now I'm sharing those lessons with you and the reasons that people have done things, the ambition, the passion, and the hardship, and their vulnerabilities. And I actually really enjoy it. This is one of the most special times as I get to sit down with people that I really would love to chat to and ask them the questions that are burning in my mind. If you are the same as me and you're pushing the limits and the edges of what you do, please like and subscribe to the show. It helps me tremendously to get new guests on the show and expand that reach so we can help more people together. Today on the show, I have Tracy Hall, who is an accomplished author, keynote speaker, and seasoned executive with over 25 years of experience in global marketing roles with tech giants. But Tracy today is going to tell you the true cost of broken trust. She lost her life savings to a con man, and there were 15 victims who stole $7.6 million, and she was the last victim. Tracy endured 18 months of psychological manipulation from a serial con man who also happened to be her boyfriend. That boyfriend was Hamish, or was it? There's another name, an alias. So on the show today, we have one of the top 20 fraud experts on LinkedIn in 2025, the best keynote speaker I've seen in a long time. Tracy Hall, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on and for sharing your story.
Oh, thanks, Tim. What an intro. That was very, very nice to hear on a Monday.
What a story. I mean, the first time I heard you speak was at a marketing society event a few weeks ago here in Singapore, and it was like something of a Netflix documentary. I wasn't expecting this. Like, can you just start? Let's start at the action. Let's start what happened. Let's go through the background, a little bit on the background, and how your life story shifted powerfully from, a successful marketer of 20 plus years career to then discovering that you'd been defrauded by one of Australia's most notorious con men.
Yeah, it is a story that should be made into a movie one day. I think it's wild. But essentially what happened was I was, I was working, as you said, in a really high-level marketing position at eBay in Sydney. I had worked in tech for a number of years, and I was running a big team. I had a lot of responsibility. I had been separated from my husband for about a year, and I was bringing up my daughter, who was 5 at the time, as a single parenting. So I had a lot on my plate. I was pretty stretched. I was pretty tired. But at this point, I thought, you know what? I'd really like to meet someone. And I decided in all my wisdom to hop onto the apps and start dating again. And, I wasn't looking to be swept off my feet or find a new husband or have any more children. I literally was just looking for a companion, somebody that I could spend some time with on weekends. And I met a man by the name of Max Tavita. He was 41, Bondi surfer, chief investment officer for a family office. And we started an intimate and long-term relationship that lasted nearly 18 months. We took holidays together. He met my family. He met my friends. We had dinners. We had weekends. We did a lot of, surfing and paddleboarding and running. It was very active, quite a wholesome relationship, really. And it wasn't until sort of nearly 18 months later I woke up one morning and somebody had sent me a link to a news article. And that news article was a Crime Stoppers video of an unidentified man being arrested outside of his Bondi Beach apartment. And his face was all blurred out. But of course, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that that was my boyfriend, Max Tavita. But it wasn't Max Tavita. It happened to be a man by the name of Hamish McLaren, who is, as you said, one of the world's most prolific con men. And he was being arrested for swindling 15 victims out of $7.6 million. I was one of those victims. I lost $317,000. So I lost my entire life savings, all of my superannuation and pension fund accumulation. And Hamish was put in jail and he was sentenced to a 16-year prison sentence. And he is still in jail. He'll be eligible for parole next year.
That is a mic drop moment, if ever there was one. Man. And
Yeah,
so
it's
that's it.
wild.
You invited him into your life, and
Yeah,
you did what any normal person looking for connection would do. Like you up until that point, everything was awesome. Like he was a charming man. You had a budding relationship going on. Like and I guess in your memoir, The Last Victim, you talk about losing not just money, right? This isn't just about
mm,
the loss of money. This is about trust,
yeah.
identity, security. Like how does someone reclaim, or how did you reclaim your identity and trust during this?
Yeah, you know, I talk about the price of trust, you know, and the price of trust always feels like it should be a monetary conversation. But in cases of financial crime, and particularly things like romance fraud or intimate fraud, like what I experienced, very rarely is the money loss the hardest thing you'll have to deal with. Because yes, I mean, the financial hit was huge. It was everything I'd saved for. It's 22 years of career savings. It was shares that I'd accumulated from working in tech. It was some savings that I had. I was a single mom. It was everything that I had. And yes, that hit was huge and has taken a lot to rebuild from. But it was the emotional and the psychological betrayal that felt more impactful for me, because when something like this happens and you're so incredibly betrayed, you lose faith in yourself, your ability to make decisions. You lose confidence. You lose faith in humanity and the world. You don't know what is real and what isn't. Like that somebody could lie beside you for nearly 18 months and pretend to love you and build a future with you, but also on the inside be plotting to destroy you. Like it is the most, you know, we don't default to doubt. When we meet people, we default to truth, we default to honesty, and we want to believe that people are good and true humans, because that's how, like, the world wouldn't work if we didn't. And so when that is so incredibly different to what you expect and what you've always had in your life, it is so jarring and impactful. I'd never met anybody like Hamish, and nobody had ever betrayed me on such a level. And so I felt quite, um, I was flattened, you know, emotionally and psychologically, I was flattened. And so rebuilding from that has actually been a bigger task for me than rebuilding my financial security, even though I've had to work incredibly hard at that as well. So I think it's really important to know that these crimes, they're so impactful on so many different layers, and that's something that I talk about a lot when I do my keynotes, and really try and help people understand the human toll that financial crime has. It's not just money; it's so much more than that.
And your keynotes are fantastic. They're outstanding. The room is hanging on tenterhooks. Like they're there. Like wait, like I was just like glued, glued to your story. And as someone with, deep experience in professional corporate background, like you've been a marketing consultant, marketing director for GoDaddy. You were head of brand and marketing communications for eBay at the time. Like, how did you leverage that professional experience to help shape how you dealt with this personal crisis and build, like, is there anything that professionally you've done that then you could pull in to help you rebuild afterwards, especially this, not just the money stuff, like obviously get
Mm,
another job and start saving. That's hard, right? Because you've been punched and taken, and as you said,
mm.
you were flat. But the emotional side of this.
I think the positive side of having those jobs, or having that job at the time, was that it was actually an incredible distraction.
Hmm.
So I don't know if I can pull any lessons from that. You know, obviously I was running a big team. I had a lot of responsibility. When I walked into the office after this all happened, even though my life was falling apart personally, I had a role to play. You know, I was leading a team. I had big budgets. I had responsibilities. I had commitments. I was driving agencies. You know, there was a lot to do. And in a lot of ways, for me, that was such a good way to compartmentalize what I was going through. And I think I've always been quite good at that, you know, like even single parenting and working in really big jobs, it's really quite easy for me to compartmentalize. When I'm home, I'm this. When I'm at work, I'm this. It doesn't, you know. So during those sort of months and years after Hamish was arrested, when my life was literally falling apart personally and financially, work was it gave me a purpose. And of course, obviously there was a financial outcome to that as well. But, and I was so scared about losing my job because it was the only financial lifeline I had. So I actually worked harder than I've ever worked before. And it was just such a great distraction because while I was there being a senior marketing executive, I wasn't the woman who lost her life savings to a man she fell in love with and trusted, who completely deceived and betrayed her. So that was a really interesting time for me in terms of how I could use that job to sort of pull me out of the depths of what I was going through. In terms of sort of lessons from corporate life, I can't think of any sort of direct links right now. I just completely separated myself from what was happening personally to what I had to do professionally, and it worked. It worked at the time for me. I was pretty burnt out by the end of it, but I did what I needed to do to get through.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So you went back into work and it actually became a lifeline. Were you in the press then, in the media, like concurrently with working, or was that kind of like separate? Like you saw him on Crime Stoppers. Like, did people in the office know, or were you how did you manage that piece?
Not very many people knew in the beginning. In fact, not very many people knew what had happened for about 2 years.
On
So
purpose,
before
or
yeah, yeah,
strategically, you were like, no, this is staying.
yeah, because I was so, and this is a very similar emotional fallout for most people who lose money to financial crime, scams, fraud, is the shame and embarrassment is so overwhelming, because essentially what it looks like is that you have enabled that crime to happen. I freely gave him the money. In fact, I wanted to give him the money. He had created this world where he had groomed and coerced me to a point where I believed he was the perfect person to invest my life savings, because he created this movie where he was this finance professional, and there were the Bloomberg monitors in his lounge room, and there were the fake reports and letterhead. There was the fake office he'd go to that he'd send me text messages and photos from. There was, the CEO that I spoke to. There was so much. There were characters, like there were sets and scenes and characters, like it was this world that we lived in that he created that was all had this confirmation of it was what it looked to be, with things that I saw and touched and spoke to and smelt and felt and all of those things. So it wasn't just this sort of this weird digital thing. It was real. It was in real life. And so, there was all of that. And then I've forgotten what we were talking about.
Well, what was clever, what stood out to me just then is that, to your point about truth, we look for, we're not looking for the con artist,
No.
we're looking for truth. And is there something that we distribute the truth we have, or our kind of like trust that if someone shows us an office, we think that's a real office, or the Bloomberg terminals in the room. Like, is that we do with the same trust, or we deliver the same trust to someone else?
100%, because it's actually biological. So if you think back to our primal times, we have to trust. We didn't survive as a species if we didn't trust our tribe, if we didn't form social connections, if we didn't rely on others to help us, to keep us safe. So biologically, we've actually developed with this innate nature to trust. We default to truth. We look someone in the eyes and we say, "My name is Tracy Hall," and we are believed. Because that is the way that we actually have evolved as a species. And then the other part of it is, because of that, our society has evolved with what I call these invisible contracts of trust. And some examples of that, and they're everywhere when you start looking at it, is, you go to the doctor and you don't ask to see their medical degree. You just trust that they've got the right qualifications. You trust that they'll give you the right medication. You trust when you get on an airplane that the pilots haven't been drinking and that they're operating under the regulations and the rules that keep us safe. Same with people driving in the opposite direction to us on the roads. We trust they have their license. We trust they know the same road rules. We trust they haven't been drinking. And there are examples of this everywhere, because if we defaulted to doubt as a species, the world wouldn't work. We cannot default to doubt. We have to default to truth, and we assume honesty. And that is a reflection of ourselves, but also a reflection of the goodness of the world we live in. And I do believe that most people are good people. It is just these these bad apples and these bad eggs that exist amongst us, they live amongst us, they work with us, who are trying to find, the loophole. And then, the other portion of it is, whilst we are biologically wired to trust and we have invisible contracts of trust, and our society wouldn't work if we didn't trust, we are given examples every day of why we shouldn't trust. Digital distrust. It is, people are scared now to open an email, to click on a link, to answer a phone call, because we're so scared that it's going to be something untrustworthy. And so there's this really interesting kind of tension between these innate things that we want to believe are true and then what the world is showing us. I mean, AI is one of the biggest forces eroding trust in our communities right now, and for our brands, for our businesses, as leaders, we can't believe what we see anymore. So how do we actually, how do we deal with that? So yes, it's a reflection of ourselves, but it's all biologically wired when you think about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and we need it to make the world go round. But so coming from the brand perspective, how should a brand think about trust now and safety by design in terms of at the core of their teams, their work, everything?
Yeah, I think it is about thinking about trust in a way that maybe you've never thought about it before. And that could be as a business, as a brand, as a leader, or as, frankly, a human. And when you think about trust, it's in all the small moments. It's not the one big shiny campaign or the leader standing up at a crisis point saying, hey, trust me, we've got this. It is in all the moments that happen. It's, it's cumulative. Trust is cumulative. And it's really interesting that no one really thinks about trust until it's been breached or until it's been taken from you. I've never thought about trust so much. I just assumed trust. So when I think about it, is really creating trust and safety by design at the core of your business, your ethics, your leadership, your employees, your culture, whatever aspect or layer that you're looking at it through, thinking about how you build it into your business. And again, it's not the shiny campaign on top that says, hey, we've got this fraud protection, or hey, you can trust us, or being visible. It's really in, I think, leadership is the core. So what I talk about is, visible and ethical leadership. The fish rots from the head, but so too does it sparkle. Trust is not built in the shadows. It's built with, visible leaders who are authentic and real and there. And then I talk to a whole bunch of other things. There's probably 8 or 10 of them, but if I just wanted to focus on a couple, it's, radical transparency. Being super open, like not having to guess, and it kind of, gives you a few, points on the ladder before a crisis hits by being radically transparent. I think there's going to be a move, especially from a marketing perspective, to find more human, less digital ways to interact with customers. And if you think about your teams, how do you get your teams together after, many, many years of us being remote? Because we want to look people in the eye. We want to touch, feel, and smell a brand. Activations and events always used to be the first thing that got cut from the budgets when I was in marketing pre-COVID. And I think there's going to be a move back to that, because customers and people do want to feel and see with their own eyes and feel that connection with your brand. I think one really interesting thing that I've been thinking a lot about is creating opportunities for smart friction. Mm-hmm. I cannot tell you how many hours of my career I've spent trying to get friction out of the customer process or the customer journey, get the customer from sign up to check out as quickly, painlessly, and seamlessly as possible, and take all those friction points out. And what we know now with scams and fraud is that criminals will actually take advantage of those loopholes of no friction. So they will actually weaponize that in terms of their ability to get through and hack and find ways around. And, I think the other thing is, we know that when people slow down just a little bit, then scams and fraud are less likely to be successful. So one of the biggest tips that we give to people when it comes to scams and fraud is just slow down, take a beat, think a little bit more critically, ask a second question. And so that friction could actually just allow that pace to slow down a little bit. So I think putting friction in at the right points, not for friction's sake, because that is just annoying, but thinking about these smart frictions. If you're in a marketing position, I think immersing yourself or inserting yourself into the product and engineering streams, getting a voice at the table. I'm pretty sure that the engineers and the product peeps aren't thinking about trust in the same way that you would be from a brand or marketing perspective. And how do you create trust and safety at the core and at the essence of your service experience? And most of the time that's through an app or a web or a digital experience. So, and then of course I think we should measure trust. We haven't traditionally done that. We measure brand health, we measure NPS, we measure employee satisfaction. But how do you measure trust, and how do you actually build your trust scores? So they're just a few of the ideas that I sort of talk to when it comes to, the price of trust for your brand, your business, your teams, or your leadership.
They're phenomenal. And I think with the velocity of AI and the kind of what you've mentioned is there's going to be a resurgence of physical activations. But I also I really like this smart friction idea, like interrupting or changing the ideation of the UX process to involve smart, because if it's smart, it's actually complementary to UX and to build loyalty with the consumer. Something that stood out there was, do you think smart friction also applies to the human side of things? Because something you said stood out. Scammers don't hack systems, they hack people. What do you mean by that? And what are some of the red flags that people should look out for?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we just go back to the smart friction thing and keep it in a real life human sense, you think about the level of security checks that we go through in an airport now, which are different to what they used to be. Probably pre Twin Towers and things like that. Like the level of security has ramped. Now, I would see that as smart friction, because when I go through those processes, I'm not cursing the airport or the airlines for making me do that. I believe that that's there for my safety and to make things safer for everyone. So I am happy with that friction. I am happy to stand in line for 2 minutes longer to get through that process in a way that I never used to. So in real life, I think there's some really good examples you can draw from where you kind of go, well, yeah, friction in that case it's actually really worth it. Could it be more efficient in the future with some different technology? Yes, of course. We're already seeing that now. So things will evolve over time, but that's just an example.
You understand the intention in that use case.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, and again, that comes down to communicating with your with your customers, and especially if you're in a marketing role, that if friction is going to be added into the process from a digital perspective, then it's well explained. There's an obvious reason for it. We have something in Australia now called confirmation of payee, and that is where if you're paying someone on your digital banking app, you put in the name, so it might be Tim Castle, I put in your account details, and there's a button that you press, and it basically pings those details and tells me whether the account details that I've plugged in actually is linked to an account called Tim Castle. Now, if they're not, or if it's to a business name or something like that, I would probably reach out to you and say, hey, this is a bit weird, whatever. And then it's just that moment where you go, I'm just going to double check that who I'm sending money to is who I think I'm sending money to. Very small amount of friction. And in most cases, 90% of cases, 95% of cases, it pings back and says, yes, those account details are correct for the name that you've given us. Go send the money. And that's fine. But in the cases that it isn't, in cases of fraud, that's where that moment where you just stop and go, oh, that's weird. Why would that name be on that account, but the person's given me this name? Now, had that have been in place when I met Hamish, then those alerts would have come up to me. And it didn't exist back then. So there's that. Yes, now, scammers don't hack systems, they hack people. One of the most interesting things that I've seen in the last sort of 6 to 9 months is some of the biggest cyber attacks that we've seen are not, it's not because there's been a technology attack or some incredible technology that's hacked through a system. It's actually been a human attack. And one great example of this, and I could give you many, but Qantas, because it's very recent. So Qantas was hacked, and a couple of weeks ago, about 5 million records were leaked onto the dark web because of this cyber attack. Now, that wasn't a technology attack. That was a masterclass in social engineering. So what actually happened, which you might be interested to know, is a criminal called up a person working at a third-party supplier for Qantas and asked and pretended to be somebody from IT. They, assumed a level of authority. They probably applied some pressure, and they asked this employee to give them access to a system through a password or a verification code. Now, the authority bias and the urgency got this employee to give them that verification code, and that criminal then got into the system, which allowed them to access those records. Really bloody simple, And I think, when we hear about these cyber attacks, we think of these amazing hackers hacking into technology and technology needs to be better. No, humans need to be better because we're actually the weakest link. Because a scammer will essentially, they'll hijack your emotions by trying to get you into a heightened state, and whether that's fear or love or hope or excitement. And then they'll apply urgency. There's always urgency because that gets you getting you acting a lot quicker. They'll play on your biases. So in that case, it was authority bias, because we believe that if someone says that they're, a high-level executive from a security company that needs access to a system to do X, Y, Z, we don't question that. We don't say, well, I'd like to see your credentials. Like, I need to double check with your manager if you're actually that person. We just assume that people are who they say they are. And then, of course, there's vulnerabilities that we all have as humans. Now, in the case of that employee, who knows? Maybe they were tired. Maybe they didn't sleep well the night before. Maybe they were doing 5 things at once when this person called, and they applied the pressure and they went, quick, get that off my desk. Maybe they were, maybe they'd had a big night last night. I mean, who knows? Like, we're all vulnerable in some way, shape, or form. And this is what the scammers will play on psychologically to get through. And the weakest link in the defense ecosystem, sadly, is humans. So we can put all the technology in place in the world, but a criminal is more likely to socially engineer and hack a human than they are trying to get through a corporate firewall. So this is why I'm so passionate about educating people and going, here are all the things you need to know. Here's what you need to be aware of. Here are the tools and tips and tech that you can use. And actually giving people compliance training that is meaningful. Because this is how our businesses, are vulnerable. And it's just unfortunate. And it's never going to change, because the human condition is never going to change. So that's sort of, I think it's really interesting to think about the psychological nature of scams and fraud, not it's a hey mum scam, or it's a phishing email scam, or it's those things are going to change. It's the psychological tactics that will stay the same.
Wow. Yeah. So it really is. They play on your vulnerabilities. They find the weakest link, and that's us. And it can be anyone, right? It's not just, it's anyone. It's not that's something in your talks and your book. I think you draw along on the beginning of this was a lot of shame around the journey of being scammed. And then now this idea of like perhaps healthy vulnerability versus dangerous vulnerability. Like what would we say to like like how do you look at finances, trust, relationships now?
Yeah, I think it's about being aware of your vulnerabilities, because most of us as humans would say, do you know what? It's a weakness. It's weak to be vulnerable. Like, a lot of people would say to me, well, maybe this happened to you because you were going through a divorce and you were vulnerable. And I'm like, I always really struggled with that, because I guess I didn't want to admit that that was the case. We all want to think that we're strong and that we're bulletproof and all of those things. But what I've come to realize is, yes, that is true. Yes, that is what was happening in my life at the time. But my other vulnerabilities that may not have seemed so obvious were, I was stretched. I was working 16-hour days, Tim. Like, I was working in the city every day, getting my kid to and from childcare on my own, putting her to bed at 7 o'clock, logging back on the computer and working through till midnight every night. I was tired. I was stretched. I had a lot on my plate. I was single parenting. Like, those things are vulnerabilities. Now, is that a weakness? No, I don't think it is. It's just a fact of life. And when you've got young children, you are really tired and you're stretched. When you're working big jobs, you are really like, pulled in many directions and you've got a lot of things on the go. If you're an executive working for an international company, you're probably going through different time zones every other week. Jet lag is a vulnerability. A cost of living crisis is a vulnerability. If people are stressed about money and an opportunity comes their way to make a little bit extra on the side as a hustle, then people take that opportunity because they're feeling the pressure somewhere else. There are so many things that make us. Maybe you're grieving. Maybe someone close to you has just passed away, and you're just you're deep in grief. Maybe you're going through a divorce. Maybe you've just had a baby. We all know that is a really big life. Maybe you're busy selling a house. I mean, these events that happen to us or that we go through in life are just life. It's not. Everyone goes, oh, you just don't be vulnerable. Well, we're all going to be vulnerable at any given point in any week. And what happens is it's the exploitation of the vulnerability that is the crime. And so it's being aware of your vulnerabilities, but also not being embarrassed by them. And it's just about being more vigilant, having people alongside you when you're in those vulnerable moments looking out for you. So if you know that your coworker or your partner or your parent is going through something, then that is likely to make them probably a little more vulnerable than they ordinarily would be. And that's where open conversations about money come in, and like just having that connection. I think people are operating really independently now. Like, we could call it a loneliness epidemic if we want, but a lot of people don't have a lot of contact in their life, and then they get connected to somebody through their phone or through Roblox or Words with Friends or Facebook Marketplace, and suddenly they've got someone who's texting them every morning, every night, and probably another 20 times in between. It's intoxicating. And so you can see just how easily this happens.
What you just shared then, I think is an absolutely the crux of it, and some real tips there that I think people should really take note of, especially that idea of looking out for others, like looking at what they're going through and not just thinking, oh boy, that's hard, or it's not the direct thing. They're now vulnerable to an attack. That the attack's always there and always coming, right? It's because anyone,
Yeah.
I'll share something. I've actually been not to the level, I didn't, I hope my wife isn't a scammer, but like, like I have actually fallen for a scam, and I was expecting a an MBA certificate to appear through the post, and the scam was a scam email from the post saying pay $3 and we're going to deliver your package. And I'm like, oh, I'm expecting a package. And then they wiped my account, right? And lots of money went out because they're actually putting my card details into their Apple
Yep.
account, whatever it was. And they bought a bunch of TVs. So I've seen it, but I've also, like, just talking to people, it's happening. Like, I was in a taxi the other day, and the poor woman had lost, I think it was $1 million to someone she trusted, exactly. And that's that she trusted this person was going to make them a quick buck, and then they could retire in in Europe or wherever they wanted to go.
Yeah.
Just absolutely, you're spot on, and you're teaching me, right? This is a really good example, because it's, what are those people going through? How can we support them while they're going through that? Because, and just being aware, like parents,
Yeah.
grandparents, all of these people,
Yeah.
it's
And
going to
just
happen.
talking about it, because there's a lot of, there is not one keynote or workshop or any kind of appearance that I do that someone doesn't come up to me afterwards. And this happened in Singapore. Actually, there was probably about 5 people after I spoke, maybe 6, that came up to me and told me their story of exactly what you have just shared then. And sometimes it's it's a certificate in the post that you think is coming. And now that's a very targeted scam, because they would have known that was coming for you. Somehow they would have known, because what they what they targeted you with was a very realistic opportunity. You got excited. You know, you were like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to get my certificate, and it's really important to me, and I'll give them my $3, and then bang, your account gets wiped.
And I was
Now,
tired because we had a baby and it was like really early in the morning, and I didn't
yeah,
think about it. I didn't think this link is not the link.
and you're doing it on your phone, so you're not always looking at a full URL. And, you know, every time I speak, somebody will come up to me afterwards, at least one or two people, and say, and tell me their stories. Now, if I wasn't standing up having those conversations, most people would never have told. And most people say to me, oh, I haven't told anybody this before, you know, because they're so embarrassed and ashamed of what happened. And it could be a couple of $100, it could be a couple of $1 million. And, you know, this is the thing. We don't talk about money. We don't talk about how much money we earn. No one tells each other how much money they earn. We don't talk about where we're investing it. And we certainly don't talk about how much money we've lost. And so this silent secrecy around money actually is just this perfect petri dish for scammers to thrive, because they prey on the fact that, you know, my mum's a widow and she plays words with friends, and I don't talk to her every day, but maybe she's met someone online that she's connected with and is showering her with a lot of time and attention, because, you know, our kids, you know, her kids are grown up, and, you know, unless I'm talking to her and saying, hey, you know, have you met anyone online, or, you know, who are you talking to, who are you going for lunch with, who are you having coffee with, and, you know, really thinking about those connections in your life where, you know, that conversation might come up. And yeah, I think it's just a fascinating thing that we just don't talk about. So part of my whole, you know, advocacy work too is to release the stigma from this crime and release the shame. And there are a lot of people that are still very, you know, hurt and impacted by what's happened to them. And some of these people may have only just happened, and for some people it's years and years ago. And I feel so compelled, you know, I'm strong enough to get up and talk about it. And I'm happy to be the voice for other people if it means that they then feel the confidence to go and just confide in one friend, or just go and get help from another. Or maybe it's triggered something to go, oh, my son's doing something with I might just have a word to him, you know. And I think these conversations are really, really important to have. So yeah, it is important. We are very lonely. I think it's very, very easy for criminals to get hold of us and to manipulate us.
And tell us about some of the work that you do, because you do work with some very large organizations all over the world with your, not only your keynotes, but how can people leverage what you're offering?
Yeah, it's multi-layered. So of course I do keynotes, which are really impactful because it's such a big story, and it had a lot of media coverage, and it does get people to stop and take notice. I think a lot of brands and companies are trying to, you know, tackle this issue of cybersecurity and compliance and risk and governance, but the way in which they're doing it, not only for their employees but for their customers, is becoming very desensitized. You know, you can't open an email now or an app or a website with some banner telling you that, you know, be careful of your login. And people are just brushing past it and, you know, ignoring it. I think in terms of compliance training for staff, there is an opportunity to, you know, have someone come in with real life stories and go, hey, this happened to me and here's everything I learned. And at least people are going to listen. So I do the big keynotes at events and conferences and for corporates. I talk to compliance within organizations. Financial wellbeing pillar is one that people and culture teams bring me in for. And then, of course, there's workshops and, you know, talking to sort of groups like the elderly, so seniors. And one of my criticisms of the work that is being pushed out, you know, the comms that is being pushed out, and I fully appreciate, because I worked in this world for 25 years, that what you want to say to customers, by the time it gets through legal and compliance and all the people that have to sign it off, it's not what you want it to be. So I'm not criticizing the work, but, you know, what is going out to customers is just so streamlined and vanilla and just not impactful. And I think in any kind of marketing communications, we have to stir up some level of emotion for people to remember, or give them really practical tips and tools. So for seniors, I don't think it's enough to put on an email, set up your two-factor authentication. They don't know what that means, you know.
Yeah.
And in industry, I hear, you know, oh, two-factor is so 10 years ago, we should stop talking about that. And I get up and I say, look, with all due respect, the people of, you know, our communities, especially the more elderly or people from non-English speaking backgrounds, or disabled, you know, people with disability, they do not know what these words mean. You have to show them. We have to show, not tell, you know. So get a cup of tea and sit with your parent or your grandparent and say, let me tell you what two-factor authentication is, and let's set up a couple of them so you know what you're doing. Or mum, here's how you do a reverse image search if you're buying something on Facebook Marketplace, you know. Or if your girlfriend's dating online, let's do a reverse image search of that guy because he kind of looks interesting, or might be an AI photo, we don't know, you know. So just really that. And it's the same with our children, you know. I talk a lot about one of the scams that is the most frightening scam that I'm seeing right now. It's the most aggressive, and it's one hitting our teenagers, and it's teenage sextortion, which is essentially blackmail. You know, our kids are getting targeted on social media apps by criminals who are pretending to be teenagers. They build these hyper intimate relationships very quickly. They request a nude or an illicit video, and then once they have them, they blackmail them and say that they'll share that content with all of their social media followers, their schools, their parents, their friends, everybody, if they don't send money or a gift card or more content. Now, this has escalated, like I could tell you the percentages, but it would blow your mind. It is so aggressive. It is so fast. It is targeting kids in Western countries like America, US, Canada, and Australia. Frightening rates, 90% boys. And, you know, in the last few years, sadly, there's been 50 suicides at least off the back of teenage sextortion. So getting back to the tips and tricks, you can't just say to a kid, don't accept a random friend request on Snapchat, or don't send a nude. Like, you have to sit with them and go, show me how disappearing messages work. I want to understand that. Or, you know, how would you know if a profile was fake? What would the signs be? Should we go through your Snap and see if you've got any, you know, friends that are like that, and let's see if we can spot them. You have to sit and show them and do it together. It's not enough to just say a line and tick the compliance box. So anyway, that was a bit of a rant because I feel very passionately about teenage sextortion. I've just written a course on it. There's a free quiz that you can do. I'll send you the links for those. There's a set of emails that people can receive just to be more educated. I find it so incredibly frightening that our children are dealing with this, and it's not about, yes, they're getting money out of it, but it's not about money. It's about, you know, it's about embarrassing them. It's about using their sexual content as leverage. It's about selling that content on the dark web to porn rings. Like, it is so frightening what is happening that I want every parent in the world to know that it's a thing and what they can do and how they can spot the red flags.
Yeah, that is like, thank
Sorry,
you.
that was a rant, wasn't it?
No, but it isn't a rant. But like, it's thank you for doing the work that you're doing and being a lighthouse, because this is the reality of the modern age, and it starts with little things like, yeah, money and scams on email. But this is prevalent, and what you're explaining is this is in your house, and you need to do this. Not doing this is not preparing your kids or yourself for the realities of the modern world. And I think in your talk you said over $1 trillion is lost to scams. But imagine,
Yep.
now we're talking about life being lost. Now we're talking about life being ruined, which is why I think your story speaks volumes. And obviously you turned it around, and you're now out there advocating. And I just want to take a moment to applaud you for doing that, because there's not, then we need to have more of you doing this, and especially
Yeah.
this last part, which is actually, and being a dad, and you being a mom, and like, it gets you in the heart. And I'm sure the listeners, it will have got them all to actually, but do we take action on it? Am I now going to go and sit with my kids and go, hey, It's not just about talking to strangers anymore. Like, that's the point, is that we can't just listen to this podcast and your message and go, I agree with you, Tracy, I agree, and then not do anything.
Mm.
You have to go and put the time in to
Yeah, you
educate
have to
ourselves.
educate yourself. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's exactly it, Tim. Like, you have to educate yourself because, sadly, again, the technology is not going to save us. It doesn't matter how many two factors you put on your accounts. It doesn't matter how, savvy you are in what you think is your cybersecurity. If you don't know these things exist or how they get in, or being aware of your vulnerabilities and your psychological traits that are going to make you vulnerable to this, like, you don't know. Like, most parents I speak to about teenage sextortion have no idea how Snapchat works. Now, this is the main, Snapchat and Instagram is the main platforms where this kind of targeting happens by
Does Evan
offenders.
and Mark Zuckerberg, are they aware of this? Are they, I know, man, I'm not being stupid. Of course they're aware of this. Are they, how are the organizations like Snapchat and those dealing with this? Surely there's got to be better practices above profit to merge the two, or is that part of what your advocacy is pushing for?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're definitely doing certain things, but and it's the same with dating apps. These fake profiles that exist and turn up on dating apps that allow people to defraud, our citizens out of trillions of dollars every year, just continue to exist. But it's a slow burn. I see some platforms doing more than others. I think they do know this exists. I don't know, the cynical part of me, like, I've worked in tech for long enough. If for example, 30% of your user base or your active users are fraudulent, and you turned a switch off and overnight you lost 30% of your active
Your
user base,
valuation.
like, what would that do to your share price? Who's going to make that call? So I think there are these incremental things that they're doing, but of course the criminals are very savvy. They pivot, they use AI technology. They are not bound by the governance and risk and compliance constraints that we are. They don't care about any type of laws. Why would they care about laws surrounding, like, digital privacy and AI? So they are operating faster than we can keep up with, and the platforms aren't shutting things down, which is why I'm very, very supportive of the social media delay for children under 16 in Australia. Because, what I saw on my daughter's phone when I had confiscated it earlier this year on Snapchat was very, very concerning. And that time frame is just allowing me to have richer conversations with her, educate myself, and getting her to a point where her brain is a little bit more developed to be able to learn how to spot a fake profile or a script, or just have that level of maturity. And those conversations that you have with a 16-year-old are very different to the ones you'd have with a 13-year-old. So I'm very, very much in favor of that, because at the moment the platforms are not they're not taking those big steps. Yes, I would say they're doing incremental things, but the criminals are also very, very good. So dating apps, for example, they could put in place a mandatory identification verification test or check. It's like IDV. So it's the same as like what happens when you go and get a bank account. You have to provide a government issued ID, and that verifies you as a true and real human that is linked to your name and your photo and all the things that are true about you. If the dating apps did that, which is possible because the technology actually exists, it's just not mandatory.
Smart friction.
Smart friction, but I never would have met Max Tavita, because Max Tavita doesn't have a government issued ID. He doesn't
exist,
have a bank account. He doesn't exist. But I would, so he wouldn't have been. And, I spoke to a victim a couple of weeks ago. She's lost over $800,000 to a man she met on Hinge that encouraged her to do some crypto trading with some money that she had from a house that she sold. Single mum with 3 kids. She didn't give him the money. She did it on a trading platform, but the trading platform was fake and fraudulent and set up by these syndicates internationally. She lost $800,000. Now, she won't get that money back. That money's gone, But she met a guy called Carlo on Hinge who was probably, operating out of one of these compounds in Southeast Asia as a victim himself of human trafficking. So,
Yeah.
if IDV existed, she wouldn't have lost $800,000. It's a pretty easy flick.
And
Just,
Tracy, like,
switch the flick.
this is a whole thing in itself, because even what you mentioned there, like, and we can go into this. I know we need to close this off in a minute, but like the fact that the people that are doing the scamming in those sort of factories or
Mm,
farms, they're also tortured and abused, and they're
yeah,
scammed themselves. So it's not just, oh, there's so
yeah.
many people out there that are wanting to manipulate and take money. It's a whole
It
epidemic in itself.
Yeah, it's one of the saddest things about this
Absolutely.
industry, and scamming is an industry. There is thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have been lured into scam compounds under kind of fake but attractive employment opportunities. Their passports get taken from them, and they are imprisoned and tortured if they don't meet their scam KPIs. So the people that are scamming you, whether they're calling or texting you and they seem desperate, or they're really putting the pressure on you for money, it's probably because they're going to get tortured if they don't make that sale. Now, two sets of victims, and it's not to say that it's right, but it opens up your mind to a level of compassion and empathy as to who's on the other end of that, of that attack or that target. And this isn't the case in every single case, but a lot of these digital scams that are coming our way are being operated by victims of human trafficking.
Tracy, one of the most important conversations I think we've had on the show. Thank you for coming on and for sharing this and for the work that you're doing around the world. Long may it continue. Let us push this. And where can people go to find out more about you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a great place. So Tracy Hall, Tracy Lee Hall on Instagram, or my website, tracyhall.com.au.
People, get in touch. Definitely don't take this conversation lightly. Put it into action. Take the steps that Tracy has mentioned and identified. It's here for your benefit. But most of all, get involved. Buy The Last Victim, her book, and get involved with Tracy at her website. Get her into your organization to come and do a talk, because it was outstanding. I did not stop for 1 second listening to this, and that's why I had to have her on the show. And you can see why. So thank you again, Tracy, for coming on and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you, Tim, for having me. I appreciate the chat.
What I've got for you is an objection handling mastery course. This is going to help you elevate in 2026. This is the difference between going from average to world class. I'm going to show you the #1 way to master emotional control when you're triggered, when you're frustrated. Can you imagine what your life would look like if you could respond with clarity, leadership, and influence? Welcome to the Objection Handling Mastery course. This is how you're going to elevate in 2026 and get off to a flying start. I've put together this short course to make it happen for you. It's in 5 easy digestible modules that you can devour on a weekend and implement on Monday. This is the School of Success, my online learning platform that's going to help take you from average to world class.